The mine is one of the most important buildings for the Little Loop Railroad. The entire layout needed to be designed around its footprint, from the trees to the mountain to the town. It is a massive building for the space we have. Despite being about the size of a large suburban house in scale, we're working in a scale of 1 to 48. The entire layout is only 150 by 200 scale feet. Fitting this in was trouble. But it was important to me. The mine building was... Actually, I don't know why I'm opening on this point. Sure, it's kind of interesting to see how the mine building affected the shape of the layout, but really, today's big struggle is building the building. The mine was a disaster. I started it in November, only 2 weeks after this project began, and I didn't finish it until after the big train show that I wanted to showcase this layout at had opened its doors to the public. Today, we're building the Banta Model Works Little Creek Mining Company. Banta Model Works is a company I've bought and built things from many times before. Their kits are satisfying to build, and instructions are some of the best that I've seen so far. In fact, I've got a couple of their kits lined up for future projects as we speak because I really love the build process for most of their kits. Most of their kits. I legitimately believe that if this one wasn't so daunting for me, the Little Loop Railroad would have been complete 2 weeks before the train show. But this building was a roadblock. A headache from start to finish. Okay, that's not actually true. Sounded good when I wrote it in the script, though. I actually got a substantial amount of work done on the first day. I nearly completed the hoist house. It was a little harder than I'm used to, and I would have liked something a little bit simpler personally, but it wasn't over the threshold of complication for me. The instructions said to start with the hoist house, and it seemed like the easiest part of the project. I thought it would nicely ease me into the harder elements of this kit. The main house comprised of a wooden floor and 4 wall frames. Each of these pieces had notches in them to line up with the other parts nice and easy. A little bit of wood glue in between the notches had everything held together nicely. The walls themselves are where things started to get a little bit harder to build. Instead of having the usual single laser-cut board per wall like most of the kits I've done before, this building was a bag of sticks that I had to cut to length myself, and then glue in place, board by board. That sounds tedious, doesn't it? Well, maybe it would have been to me in another lifetime, and I'm sure for others it is, but I actually found this step to be pretty satisfying. Cut the pieces to length, glue them in place, leave just enough room for the windows, rinse, repeat. There was just something satisfying to the routine. For the boards that needed angled ends where they met the roof, I just used a hobby knife and slowly cut away the excess material after they were glued in place. Also, pro tip hotshot past me, don't cut towards yourself! What are you doing? Once the glue had a little time to settle, I got to work painting the building. I used Badger Modelflex Weathered Black and dry brushed it on for an inconsistent texture that helped to highlight the wood grain of the boards. On the back of the model, though, I painted it on thick. The wood grain didn't matter as much because the building was going to be blocked by lines of trees at this point. To help give the building a little bit of grime and texture to it all, I used some darker gray pan pastels to round everything out. All of what I just described was done in a night, November 19th, 2024. I then set the project aside for 6 weeks. Every week I said I needed to do something. Every week I said it was the mine, it was the most important building. And every time, like clockwork, I froze up and got nothing done, because the way the rest of this kit was supposed to go together terrified me. In the previous video of this series, I showed off another Banta Model Works kit that had the exact same problem. The supports for the freight depot used the exact same build method as I'm about to show off here. That is, wood strips cut to fit a template. Not like the walls from earlier, specifically a template. With the freight depot, it wasn't that bad. Each assembly was fairly simple and fairly small. Sure, I had to do 8, but with each being so simple, it was a cakewalk. When it came to the mine, on the other hand, I had to assemble 4 separate templates. Actually, 2 of the templates had templates themselves, so it was actually closer to 6 templates. Not only that, but the designs for each template was more complicated than the one from the freight depot. You see those lines that are at a 45-degree angle here, making a bunch of X shapes up and down in the entire build? Yeah, those are for pieces you're supposed to put on top of the build once you're done using the template. Fortunately, in this case, those pieces were pre-cut, so I didn't have to worry about the angles, but good lord. Now, I've done scratch building before. I'm not a total stranger to cutting boards to length and assembling them into something interesting. But since the templates were made of cardboard, the wood glue I used to assemble each section often wound up gluing itself to the template. More often than not, when I tried pulling the assemblies out of the templates once they were done gluing together, I wound up pulling the assemblies apart before the template gave way. Now, I will admit I might have tried to take these assemblies out of the templates too quickly. I think the way that these assemblies are glued together leaves weak joints. Even when I was patient, sometimes things broke anyways. Not to mention that on top of all of that, the appeal of scratch building to me is figuring everything out on my own. This kit just happened to hit the perfect storm where it was both too structured and too unstructured at the same time. And it really stressed me out. Anyways, as I'm speedrunning footage in the background here to avoid explaining my pain, there's one thing I think is really important to note here. After building 2 of these tower assemblies, instead of building 2 more of the other kind, you're supposed to combine the 2 on the second side of the template. You know that problem where the assembly would tear itself apart when trying to take it off of the template? Yeah, that was compounded here, since instead of being a flat assembly, this time it was a 3-dimensional assembly. The forces were way harder to control. Another thing worth noting is that I actually made a modification to the kit. Another model railroading YouTuber, Steve Strains, actually built this kit a few months back on a small micro layout of his own. When he did, he had to turn the head pulley 90 degrees to make the kit fit in the tight space for the layout. Having a similar issue with my layout, I took a page out of his book and tried to do the same thing. However, while I planned this in advance, I did not actually prepare for it in advance. I had to cut away some new notches for the pulley to sit in, and then add some boards crossing the center of the mine shaft to help support the pulley's mount. Now, I do have some bad news. I didn't really record much else of building this mine. I do have good news though, I'm glad I didn't record much else. Normally I wish I had more content to show you guys, but writing and reading this script is bringing me back to the frustration of building this kit. If I had to review this kit, I think the results are awesome, but the build process is very much not for me. The bag of sticks was just way too much to deal with, and while it may have made some parts of the mine look really nice, I would have loved to have something a lot more reliant on laser cut assemblies. But there is another fun side effect to me not recording much of building this mine. This is the last thing I did before the big train show I exhibited the little loop at. And I mean last. I mentioned earlier that I finished this after the start of the show. These recordings you're seeing now were taken past midnight on the day of the show. Like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I was adding finishing touches. You know what? No. That's a funny story, but I'm not going to tell you it today. That's spoilers. Before I leave you here, I figure I should explain where the mine gets its name. It's pretty simple. The name comes from the saying, the 11th hour. Anyways, next time, The Great Train Show. See you then. Cheers, folks.